It was back down again, and then it took an enormous public works program known as World War II to bring the economy out of the depression.
What is the broken window fallacy? It all starts when a hooligan decides to throw a brick through the local baker's window. The community gathers at the bakery to discuss what has happened.
I feel bad for that poor baker. He's lost a window.
It's true, but if you stop and think about it, maybe it's not all that bad. After all, the baker does have to repair his window, which means the glazier will now have work to do. After getting paid, the glazier will probably spend his new income on some of your crops. Then you'll have income to spend on even more goods and services.
Biscuits and gravy! The hooligan has actually stimulated the economy. Imagine how many more jobs would have been created if the hooligan had done more damage.
Have you all lost your minds, huh? Haven't you read Frederick Bastiat or Henry Hazlitt? You're only focusing on what's seen, the money I will spend repairing the broken window, or while you will ignore what's unseen, the money I would have spent on a new suit. The tailor would have also spent his new income on some of your crops, a farmer giving you more income to spend on other goods and services. The only difference is that I would have had both my window and a new suit, whereas now I only have a window. This hooligan has cost our community a new suit.
The story of the hooligan shows us that physical damage destroys wealth. After all, if the hooligan's act actually did stimulate the economy, then society would have been better off if he had destroyed the sign, the building, and the rest of the town. But the broken window fallacy is much more prevalent than it may first seem. In fact, it remains at the core of mainstream policymaking. For example, when the government claims to create jobs by financing public works programs, such as construction, it does so at the expense of its citizens in the form of either higher taxes or inflation. The citizens would have spent their tax dollars on other goods and services, like refrigerators or surfboards or movie tickets, which would have increased job growth in those industries. Because these goods will never be produced, however, these potential jobs remain unseen, but they are no less real and no less important as the jobs that we do see. So if you ever hear of the stimulative effects of wartime spending, tariffs, or stimulus bills, know that this is merely our old friend, the broken window fallacy, dressed in new clothing and grown fat beyond recognition.
Whenever the economy stumbles, a lot of people in Washington argue that government spending should be increased in order to inject money into the economy. In this Center for Freedom and Prosperity video, we're going to look at whether this policy makes sense. I'm Dan Mitchell of the Cato Institute, and we're discussing this issue because government is big now, and there's a lot of agitation to make it even bigger, ostensibly to improve growth. First, some background. During the 1930s, America was suffering from a deep downturn. An economist named John Maynard Keynes argued that the economy could be boosted if the government borrowed money and spent it. According to this approach, which is now known as Keynesianism, this new spending would put money in people's pockets, and the recipients of the funds would then spend the money. This would, according to the theory, prime the pump as the money began circulating through the economy. The Keynesians also said that some tax cuts, particularly lump sum rebates, could have the same impact since the purpose is to have the government borrow and somehow put money in the hands of people who will spend it. So is this the right recipe to boost a flagging economy? Let's first look at whether Keynesianism makes sense from a theoretical perspective and then look at the real-world evidence. Keynesian theory sounds good and it would be nice if it made sense, but it has a rather glaring logical fallacy. It overlooks the fact that, in the real world, government can't inject money into the economy without first taking money out of the economy. More specifically, the theory only looks at one half of the equation, the part where government puts money in the economy's right pocket. But where does the government get that money? It borrows it, which means it comes out of the economy's left pocket. There is no increase in what Keynesians refer to as aggregate demand. Keynesianism doesn't boost national income, it merely redistributes it. The pie is sliced differently, but it's not any bigger. The people who lend the money to government generally are not the same people who get money in their pockets because of the new spending or tax rebates, but that's not important. The Keynesian theory is based on the notion that there will be an increase in overall available cash, yet that clearly is not the case. Some advocates of this theory get a bit more creative and say that Keynesianism works because it increases consumer spending rather than the money sitting idle. But money that is unspent by consumers does not sit idle. It winds up in the banking system someplace and is used to finance investment spending. The really clever Keynesians then respond by saying people won't lend and borrow in a weak economy. But in that type of dismal economic environment, people are so fearful that they try to increase their savings, so the bulk of any so-called stimulus winds up in the banking system anyway. Before shifting from theory to evidence, we should quickly note that government could finance stimulus spending by printing money rather than borrowing. Thankfully, that option doesn't seem to be on the table, since almost all politicians now realize that it would be foolish to mimic the disastrous inflationary policies of basket case economies such as Argentina and Zimbabwe. Looking now at the real-world evidence, it's even more clear that Keynesianism is a failure. Let's go back to the Great Depression. In his 4 years, Herbert Hoover was a poster boy for statism. He increased taxes dramatically, including a boost in the top tax rate from 25% to 63%. He imposed harsh protectionist policies. He significantly increased intervention in private markets. And most important, at least from a Keynesian perspective, he boosted government spending by 47% in just 4 years. And he certainly had no problem financing that spending with debt. He entered office in 1929 when there was a surplus, and he left office in 1933 with a deficit of 4.5% of GDP. So how did Hoover's big government Keynesian experiment work? As the chart shows, growth went down and unemployment went up. Unfortunately, other than being a bit more reasonable on trade, Roosevelt followed the same approach. The top tax rate was boosted to 79%, and government intervention became more pervasive. Government spending, of course, skyrocketed, rising by 106% between 1933 and 1940. But this big government approach didn't work for Roosevelt any better than it did for Hoover. Unemployment remained very high throughout the 1930s, and overall output did not get back to the 1929 level until World War II. Other Keynesian episodes generated similarly dismal results, though fortunately never as bad as the Great Depression. Gerald Ford did a Keynesian stimulus focused on tax rebates in the mid-1970s. The economy did not improve, but why would it? After all, borrowing money from one group and giving it to another group does nothing to increase economic output. As we've explained in other videos, tax cuts only boost the economy if they reduce the tax penalty on work, saving, and investment, i.e. lower tax rates, not gimmicks. More recently, George W. Bush gave out so-called rebate checks in 2001 and 2008, yet both times there was no positive effect. And he certainly was a big spender, yet that didn't work either. Not that this should be a big surprise. Even left-wing international bureaucracies are producing research showing that bigger government hurts economic performance by misallocating national resources. Indeed, if you want to get a survey of the literature paper reviewing this evidence showing that big government means less growth, just send an email to the address on the screen. The international evidence also shows the foolishness of Keynesianism. The most obvious example may be Japan, which throughout the 1990s tried to use so-called stimulus packages to jumpstart a stagnant economy. But the only thing that went up was Japan's national debt, which more than doubled during the decade and now is far above even Italy when measured as a share of GDP. The economy, as represented by this chart showing Japan's Nikkei stock market average, remained in the dumps. Let's end this video by asking a simple question. If Keynesian spending doesn't make sense from a theoretical perspective, and also fails every time it is tried in the real world, why do politicians keep trying the same approach? Your guess is as good as mine, but I suspect that politicians just love to spend other people's money, and Keynesianism is a convenient rationale. On behalf of the Center for Freedom and Prosperity, thanks for watching. Don't forget to share this video widely. If enough people understand the truth, maybe politicians will finally do the right thing and help the economy by reducing the burden of government rather than increasing it.
The Keynesian School of Economics has nothing to do with the country of Kenya, just like the Austrian School of Economics today has nothing to do with the country of Austria. The Keynesian School is named after the late British economist John Maynard Keynes. The problem with Keynesian economics is it has never worked and it will never work. But politicians like Obama, they keep trying Keynesian policies and they keep failing. The basic Keynesian argument is that government spending can boost the economy. It will have some multiplier effect throughout the entire economy. The more that the government spends, the more jobs that will be created. False. There's this joke that goes, my wife's a Keynesian, she's always spending her way out of depressions. Obama signed the stimulus spending bill costing $814 billion, and it failed. It was a huge failure. It did not keep unemployment below 8% like he said it would. It's obvious why it failed, because if you take hundreds of billions of dollars away from entrepreneurs, job creators in the private sector, and give that money to greedy politicians, that's not going to boost the economy. Economics is the study of human action, but Keynesians ignore human action and motivation. For example, public works projects require taxes to pay for it, and taxes discourage production in the private sector. Keynesians only look at the short term. As Keynes said, in the long run, we're all dead. But we have to look at the long-term effects of all sectors of the economy. Now, with public works projects, we can visibly see construction workers working on new highway projects, but we can't visibly see all the jobs that were destroyed because of the high taxes necessary to pay for the stimulus. All that money that was taken from the productive private sector, it typically goes to fund unnecessary and unprofitable projects. Keynesians have always been wrong. The New Deal spending actually prolonged the Great Depression, which lasted over a decade. In 1931, the unemployment rate was 16.3%. In 1939, after 2 terms of FDR almost, the unemployment rate was 17.2%. The New Deal only made things worse. Huge spending cuts after World War II finally got us out of the Great Depression. From 1944 to 1948, the federal government cut spending by 75%. The average unemployment rate during this time was 3.5%. Keynesians were also wrong about stagflation in the 1970s. They said that stagflation was impossible. This is when the inflation rate is high, but economic growth slows down. Keynesian theory was discredited decades ago, yet Obama continues to try to spend our way out of the economic downturn. Never has and never will work.
A lot of warnings out there. Alan Greenspan also issued warnings. But I was stunned by reading a statement you made in the Banking Committee on September 10th, 2003. In fact, I reprinted the whole thing in my book. I want Americans who hear leaders saying every day, we could have never seen this coming. This was a shock. How did this happen? I want to read what you said 5 years before the collapse. The special privileges granted to Fannie and Freddie have distorted the housing market by allowing them to attract capital that they could not attract under pure market conditions. Like all artificially created bubbles, the boom in housing prices cannot last forever. When housing prices fall, homeowners will experience difficulty as their equity is wiped out. Furthermore, the holders of the mortgage debt will also have a loss. These losses will be greater than they would have otherwise been had government policy not actively encouraged overinvesting in housing. And you go on to say, because so many people will invest in housing, the damage will be catastrophic. Congressman, how could it be that you knew this on the banking committee in 2003 and nobody else did until after the collapse?
Well, I would think the easiest explanation is Washington, D.C. is permeated by Keynesian economic thinking. Very few even know the name Austrian economics and understand the business cycle. I was concerned about the building of the bubble since 1971 when gold was delinked from the dollar. So since that time, the bubble has been gradually being inflated, but it got out of hand in the 1990s as well as after 2000. Bernanke taking interest rates down to 1%. To me, the biggest surprise was, although I was very concerned in 2003, I was concerned before that, I'm surprised it lasted to 2007. That's when the bubble really burst. But it was amazing how long it lasts. And to me, the more amazing thing right now is not only has the financial system collapsed, which is very, very bad and very dangerous, I believe that what we're moving toward now is the collapse of the dollar. And the collapse of a dollar, because it's the international reserve currency, I think is going to be much worse than what we have already witnessed.
Can you all believe his prediction in 2003?
Prophetic. Absolutely.
Talking to everybody on the banking committee, telling them, hey, we're in trouble. Let's not go this direction.
Right.
Or we're going to be in trouble. And then, you know, Ron, somebody that probably didn't vote for you, Columbia economist Jeffrey Sachs came on this show and said what we're doing now with these economic policies is rebuilding another bubble and creating debt, more debt.
Well, they're trying, but they're going to have a difficult time reinflating the bubble. To me, what is disturbing is those individuals who did not predict what was to come are now predicting that the downturn has ended. It's over. At the end of the year, we're going to have growth. They're still listening to the Bernankes of the world. And yet, they were completely wrong before. Greenspan was wrong. Bernanke was wrong. But all of a sudden, oh, I know, the end has come, that we got into our trouble by spending too much, borrowing too much, and inflating too much, and now that's all they're doing, and now they're predicted, and they have given credibility of knowing how to predict the end of this downturn. That's to be astounding.
Hey, Ron, not only that, the very people that sat in your committee when you told them what was going to happen remained silent. And in fact, some accusing you and other Republicans that were critical of Fannie and Freddie of being racists who hated poor people. Those very people that missed all the warning signs were then put in charge of the trillion-dollar rescue.
But Joe, you got to give them a little bit of credibility here on this argument, because you know I was still on the fringe back in 2003. Nobody cared what I was saying. Now at least I have 100 or 200 people who care, so I'm getting a little bit more attention. and it isn't so much me. I'm just reciting what I've learned by studying free market economics, and we haven't had free market economics. Now they're blaming capitalism for all these problems and not enough regulation. We've had crony capitalism. We've had inflationism, corporatism, big government. We've not had true free market capitalism, so we have to define it. Somebody asked me once, what individuals caused this problem? I would put it all on the shoulders of Keynes. And you know, it's a long time since he's been around, but Keynesianism exists. Remember what Nixon told us? We're all Keynesians now. That was when the last link of the dollar to gold was removed, and since that time we've had nothing more than these bubbles and big government, but it is coming to an end. We can't afford this foreign policy or these bailouts any longer.
Exactly.
Lord Keynes, welcome, sir. It's a pleasure.
The pleasure's all mine.
Your agenda.
That won't be necessary. I am the agenda. Tell them I've arrived.
And then tell them I've arrived.
And your name is?
Hayek? F.A. Hayek. With an H.
Freddie.
Yep. Keynes.
Hey, listen, party at the Fed.
Already? 20 minutes.
Lobby. John Maynard Keynes.
F.A. Hayek.
Yeah, we're opposed.
We oppose each other philosophically.
In the same studio.
We've been going back and forth for a century.
I want to steer markets.
I want them set free. There's a boom and bust cycle and good reason to fear it. Play low interest rates.
It's the animal spirits. John Maynard Keynes wrote the book on modern macro. The man you need when the economy's off track. Depression, recession, now your question's in session. Have a seat and I'll school you in one simple lesson. Boom, 1929, the big crash. We didn't bounce back, economy's in the trash. Persistent unemployment, the result of sticky wages. Waiting for recovery, that's outrageous. I had a real plan, any fool can understand. The advice real simple, boost aggregate demand. C-I-G, altogether gets to Y. Keep that total growing, watch the economy fly.
We've been going back and forth for a century.
I want to steer markets.
I want them set free. There's a boom and bust cycle and good reason to fear it. Play low interest rates.
It's the animal spirit. You see, it's all about spending. Hear the register cha-ching. Circular flow, the dough is everything. So if that flow is getting low, doesn't matter the reason. We need more government spending. Now it's stimulus season, so forget about saving. Get it straight out of your head. Like I said, in the long run, we're all dead. Savings is destruction, that's the paradox of thrift. Don't keep money in your pocket or that growth will never lift. Because business is driven by the animal spirits, the bull and the bear. And there's reasons to fear its effects on capital investment, income, and growth. That's why the state should fill the gap with stimulus, both the monetary and the fiscal. They're equally correct. Public works, digging ditches, war has the same effect. Even a broken window helps the glass man have some wealth. The multiplier driving higher the economy's health. And if the central bank's interest rate policy tanks, a liquidity trap, that new money stuck in the banks. Deficits could be the cure you've been looking for. Let the spending soar, now that you know the score. My general theories made quite an impression. Revolution! I transformed the econ profession. You know me, modesty, still I'm taking a bow. So say it loud and say it proud, we're all Keynesians now.
We've been going back and forth for a century.
I want to steer markets.
I want them set free. There's a boom and bust cycle and good reason to fear it.
I made my case, Freddie H. Listen up, can you hear it?
I'll begin in broad strokes, just like my friend Keynes. His theory conceals the mechanics to change. That simple equation, too much aggregation, ignores human action and motivation. Yet it continues as a justification for bailouts, payoffs by poles with machinations. You provide them with cover to sell us a free lunch. Then all that we're left with is debt and a bunch. If you're living high on that cheap credit hog, don't look for a cure from the hair of the dog. Real savings come first if you want to invest. The market coordinates time with interest. Your focus on spending is pushing on thread. In the long run, my friend, it's your theory that's dead. So sorry there, buddy, if that sounds like invective. Prepare to get schooled in my Austrian perspective. We've been going back and forth for a century.
I want to steer markets.
I want them set free. There's a boom and bust cycle and good reason to fear it. Play low interest rates.
It's the animal spirit.
The place you should study isn't the bust, it's the boom that should make you feel leery. That's the thrust of my theory. The capital structure is key. Malinvestments wreck the economy. The boom gets started with an expansion of credit. The Fed sets rates low. Are you starting to get it? That new money is confused for real loanable funds, but it's just inflation that's driving the ones who invest in new projects like housing construction. The boom plants the seeds for its future destruction. The savings aren't real, consumption's up too, and the grasping for resources reveals there's too few. So the boom turns to bust as the interest rates rise. Where the cost of production price signals relies. The boom was a binge, that's a matter of fact. Now it's devalued capital that makes up the slack. Whether it's the late 20s or 2005, booming bad investments seems like they'd thrive. You must save to invest, don't use the printing press, or a bust will surely follow, an economy depressed. Your so-called stimulus will make things worse. Just more of the same, more incentives perverse. And the credit crunch ain't a liquidity trap, just a broke banking system. I'm done, that's a wrap.
We've been going back and forth for a century. I want to steer markets.
I want them set free.
There's a boom and bust cycle and good reason to fear it.
Play low interest rates.
No, it's the animal spirit. The ideas of economists and political philosophers, both when they are right and when they are wrong, are more powerful than is commonly understood. Indeed, the world is ruled by little else. Practical men who believe themselves to be quite exempt from any intellectual influence are usually the slaves of some defunct economist.